We were happy. My husband was a construction foreman, a man who built things, bridges, homes, our family. His job moved us every few years, but we never minded. New towns meant new adventures. Our two sons loved exploring. Our daughter collected rocks from every place we lived, and I found joy in making each house a home. When we arrived in Pinebrook, it felt like a fresh start. The town was small, the air crisp with pine, and the church stood at its heart, a white steeple piercing the sky. The pastor welcomed us with a smile that reached his eyes. He reminded me of my grandfather, warm and steady. We trusted him instantly. Life settled into rhythm. Sundays meant potlucks and hymns. Weekdays, my husband worked on the new highway project, the kids thrived in school, and I joined the women's circle. For months, it was perfect. Then the pastor asked me to lead a Bible study. At first, the Bible study was uplifting. We prayed for sick neighbors, shared recipes, and laughed over coffee. But the pastor began staying late, offering to walk me to my car. His hand lingered on my arm. His compliments felt heavy. One night, he texted me. It was a verse about obedience. I thanked him, but my chest tightened. When I told my husband, he chuckled. He's just passionate, he said. But the texts kept coming. Verses about submission. Stories of women who sacrificed for God's plan. I deleted them, blaming myself for reading too much into kindness. Then he cornered me after service. The sanctuary empty, his voice low. He said God had shown him a vision, our souls intertwined, a divine partnership. I fled to my car, shaking. I stopped attending Bible study. The pastor's smiles turned sharp. He began visiting our home, bringing gifts for the kids, a soccer ball for my eldest, a doll for my daughter. My husband thought it generous. One Sunday, the pastor called us to the altar. The congregation watched as he prayed over our family, his grip bruising my shoulders. He shouted about breaking chains, purifying bonds. My husband beamed, believing it a blessing. 6 days later, the crane cable snapped. They pulled my husband from the wreckage alive but shattered. At the hospital, machines breathed for him. His hand, calloused from work, felt small in mine. When his eyes opened once, he whispered to protect the kids. Then he was gone. The pastor preached his eulogy. He spoke of God's mysteries, but his gaze pinned me to the pew. Afterward, he brought casseroles, quoting scripture about trials. I ate nothing he touched. Grief hollowed me. Nights blurred into days. The pastor began arriving at dusk, insisting I needed guidance. One evening, he brought wine. Communion, he called it. I drank to numb the pain. I woke at dawn, naked, his scent on the sheets. I scrubbed my skin until it bled, burned the bedding, and told no one. Days later, my eldest son screamed awake. Something's in my stomach, he cried. Doctors found nothing. My son withered. His skin turned gray, his screams endless. The pastor visited, praying loudly over his bed. The night my son died, the pastor whispered that faith requires sacrifice. I fled Pinebrook, sold our home, changed our names, and hid in a dusty rental 3 towns over. But my daughter began coughing blood. Desperate, I called an old friend. Her voice trembled as she spoke of Miriam, a woman from the pastor's past. Miriam's husband drowned. Her son hanged himself, all after the pastor's prayers. I tracked Miriam to a trailer park. She was skeletal, eyes haunted. She spoke of the pastor's pattern, families torn apart, curses disguised as blessings. She gave me a journal filled with names, dates, and a warning. He feeds on silence. I dug into the pastor's past. Fake degrees. A first wife who vanished. Lawsuits buried by church elders. My daughter worsened, her fevered dreams filled with a praying shadow. Miriam's journal mentioned a ritual, fire on holy ground. I packed my husband's old Bible, a voice recorder, and drove back to Pinebrook. The day before I planned to expose him, my body betrayed me. It started with trembling hands, then cold sweat, dizziness so severe I couldn't stand. My daughter found me curled on the bathroom floor, clutching Miriam's journal. "Mama, you're burning up," she whispered. I'd never felt weaker, like my bones were dissolving, my thoughts scattering. The pastor called that night. I don't know how he knew. Maybe he saw me lurking near the church. Maybe he smelled fear like blood. His voice was calm, almost kind. "Stop this nonsense," he said. "You're upsetting God." I tried to speak, but my tongue felt swollen. "Think of your daughter," he continued. "You wouldn't want her to relapse, would you?" The line went dead. I crawled to my daughter's room. She slept fitfully, her cheeks flushed. I made a decision. I'll stay silent. I'll keep her safe. For weeks, I pretended normalcy. I threw out Miriam's journal. I smiled at neighbors. But the pastor's threat festered. My daughter worsened. Her cough returned, deeper, wetter. She dreamt of shadows with praying hands. Doctors blamed mold allergies. I blamed myself. One night, she vomited black bile. At the ER, a nurse pulled me aside. "This isn't natural," she said. "I've seen this before. In Pinebrook." Miriam's name hung unspoken between us. The pastor's new victims haunted me. A young widow with twin boys, her smile too bright, her eyes too hollow. I found Miriam's suicide note in my mailbox. One sentence: "Silence won't save her." That night, I didn't tremble. I drove to the church, doused the pews in gasoline, and waited. The pastor arrived at midnight, his steps light, humming a hymn. When the flames roared, he didn't scream. He laughed. "You think fire kills demons?" But I'd learned from Miriam. Fire kills flesh. Secrets kill souls. I thought weakness was collapsing on the floor. I was wrong. Weakness was believing his threats. Weakness was trading my daughter's tomorrow for today. Even today, he still walks. I bet he is still doing it to others. No one believes me. Those who know him say I have an agenda.